guys, it is April from Getting Huggy with It. Today I wanted to do a video for you guys that kind of came up randomly. I was coming up with my fall book recommendations, which I've already posted, and I'll link that somewhere for you. But while I was coming up with that video, I kept coming across books with really interesting storylines where you're not sure where your main character or a very key character stands. Now, some of these characters are just tortured souls. They are tortured souls and they can't escape their past. Some of them are characters who are really trying to gain control over their lives and they're wreaking havoc in their midst. And I just love this kind of storyline where there's a lot of gray and you don't know where these characters stand, and sometimes it makes you wonder where you stand. I just love that kind of thing. So there are a few scary, creepy books in here, but there's also a lot of historical fiction in here. There's a contemporary in here. So let's get into it. So first, let's start with the scary. You know, we might as well. A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay follows a young girl named Marjorie, and Marjorie is acting very strangely. Her family is really worried about her. They think that she's sick, that she has some sort of mental illness. They're thinking maybe it's schizophrenia. However, the doctors can't really seem to come up with anything that they believe or that really works for this case, and they start to think actually maybe she's not ill, maybe she's possessed. And so in order to pay for doctor's bills and just taking care of Marjorie generally, they agree to have their home filmed. So they become part of a TV series, like a reality TV show. And so we follow Marjorie, but we're also following her younger sister, Mary. And this kind of goes back and forwards in time. It's really Mary reminiscing about her childhood and this experience. And it is one of the creepiest books. It's very unsettling. And the whole time you are wondering, is Marjorie just ill? Or is there actually a possession story going on here? And what about Mary? And what about Mary's experience with all of this? And the whole time you're just wondering and trying to get to the bottom of it for yourself. I love those kinds of stories. So this is why I'm doing this whole video, because I just really love this storyline. Next up is The Girls. Now, this is very much a love it or hate it book, and I totally recognize that. I personally loved it. This is about a young woman who was a part of a cult, essentially. Now, it's never said that it's the Manson family, but it's totally the Manson family. You meet her as an adult. I think she's in her 30s, and she's kind of living all over the place. She's not settled down in her life, and she is reminiscing about her teenage years in the 60s and this experience that she had with the Manson family. And the whole time you are wondering, was she really a part of this or not? Because you get from her perspective that she wasn't, that she just hung out with them, and then they did these horrific things on the side. I spent the whole time kind of trying to understand this character and kind of going, okay, but did you have something to do with it? Did you? And so you find out in this book, and I really loved it. Another book that I adored is Night Film by Marissa Pessl. This is about a horror director who directs movies that are so disturbing they can't be shown in major theaters. They have to be shown like kind of underground viewings. And we follow a journalist who once upon a time had basically said that this man is a terrible person, and this journalist's career was kind of ruined because of this man. People didn't buy it. There was a huge backlash. And then we find out that this horror director's daughter has been found dead. And our journalist thinks, yeah, the horror director totally had something to do with it. And so we're diving into that. Now, you are trying to find out, not only is the horror film director good or bad, because this journalist definitely thinks that he is up to no good and is twisted and maniacal, but you're also trying to find out about this young girl. And some of the scenes with this girl in it were some of the most terrifying scenes. Like, I still have the image of her like playing piano in a completely blacked out room where she shouldn't have been there. I have it like burned into my mind. She's still scary to me. You're trying to decipher, who is she? What is she, has she gone through? Is she mentally ill, or is she like evil? Or is she a victim? Oh my God, this is one of the best books that plays on this concept of good or bad, and I just love the gray. Next is Sworn to Silence. Now, this book I actually don't have on my shelves anymore because it's part of a series. And I didn't like the rest of the series, so I've gotten rid of it. But this follows a detective who lived in an Amish community all her life. Like, she grew up Amish, and then she left that community. But she has a real respect for that community. Now, there has been a series of murders of Amish girls that is very disturbing. And she thinks that she knows who did this, who's doing these like string of murders. And she thinks, that's weird because when I was a teen, I killed him. And so you kind of go through the book going, oh, but she's the like detective, like she's the main detective in this town. And if she's not good, who is good? And is she good or is she bad? And I had that thought pattern going throughout the whole book, and I really did enjoy this book. It's gritty, which I really liked. I just wish that the rest of the series had held up from me. A lot of people adore the series though. Next up is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. And this isn't scary at all, but it definitely makes you wonder where people stand, who is right and who is wrong. This is about a little town called Shaker Heights. It's like a suburb where everything is planned, you know, to the point where like you can have this kind of color of house, but not this kind of color of house. And it's just incredibly well planned out. And in some ways it's a little bit suffocating. But it follows the Richardson family, and we follow the matriarch of the Richardson family and her children. And then we follow a woman who just comes into the town kind of randomly. She's a single mom. She has a daughter named Pearl. These families become very linked. So Mia is renting from Mrs. Richardson. They end up working together kind of, and the kids are all very good friends. And we are diving into that storyline, but there's a sub-storyline that ends up kind of taking over everyone's lives. So Mrs. Richardson has a dear friend who's been trying to get pregnant forever and has never been successful. Well, she's had a lot of miscarriages. So she's been successful, but it's ended horribly. She has decided to adopt a Chinese-American baby. And Mia has a problem with that because she knows the mother of this Chinese-American baby, and that mother never wanted to give her baby up, really. And so it's like this battle of the minds. I wish that there was more gray in this. Like, I as I was reading the book, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know who's right and I don't know who's wrong. And I loved that. As you go on, it feels like the author is pushing you to a certain direction to believe, okay, this is what you should feel. I didn't always believe that the people that seemed to be the heroines were actually the heroines. It depended on the person. But this is what is great about this book, is that there's so much gray. You don't know who is right and who is wrong because there is a crazy amount of gray. Gosh, another book that is like that is The Light Between Oceans is a great one for that as well. It's just an aside. It's not part of this list. Okay, moving on. We've got Tulip Fever. I haven't talked about this book very much on my channel. It's really disturbing, but really, really great. It's historical fiction, takes place in Holland during Tulip Fever, where tulips were incredibly precious. And we follow a young girl who is married off. She comes from a very poor family. She's married off to this older man. She doesn't love him, but he's taking care of her and he loves her, it seems. And he decides they're going to have their portrait taken. And so he hires this artist. The artist comes in and starts to paint them. And there is an instant connection between the wife and this painter. And she falls in love with this painter. Now, there is a pregnancy that unfolds in this book. And there is also a cover-up in this book. I'm not going to go into detail too much there because I don't want to give anything away. But that started to make me go, oh, how do I actually feel about the characters in this book now? What do I feel? Are we following a woman who had absolutely no choice in her own life and is taking the reins? Are we dealing with a feminist? Or are we dealing with someone who doesn't care about anyone but themselves? Oh, it's so good. It's really, really good. Just super disturbing. Next up is Affinity by Sarah Waters. I read this years ago. It's been so long since I've read this book, but it is absolutely brilliant. In this book, we're following a middle-class woman who goes to visit the prison, a female prison, and there she meets a woman who did seances. Like, that was her job. She did these seances. At one of the seances, a woman dies, and so she's in jail. And these two women strike a friendship. I don't know if I want to say love is the word for this relationship, but there's definitely more than friendship here. And we are trying to figure out if this woman in prison, is she completely innocent, or was she to blame for this woman dying in the seance, and who is she? And I think this was one of the first books that I read that really did play with that concept. I love this book. It's the perfect fall read as well. Oh my God. Yes. Another great book that kind of plays with that as well is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Oh, I love this. I love this. I read this winter and just felt madly in love. This book, we're following a young woman who I think is like a lady's maid. She's taking care of this elderly woman. They're on a cruise, and she meets this really handsome man named Mr. De Winter, and there's like this fast love affair between the two of them. And he says, "Will you marry me?" And she says, "Yes." And so they move to Manderley. And she soon realizes that there's a bit of history in Manderley and Mr. De Winter's past that's very confusing for her. So she really learns a bit more about Mr. De Winter and his past wife, Mrs. De Winter. Her name is Rebecca. Rebecca died tragically way too young. And you find out more about Rebecca. She seems to be this perfect woman, and yet is she or isn't she? Who was Rebecca? And you are trying to discover that in this book. Just a couple more. Tangerine. Love this. Oh my god. This is the kind of book that stays with you. Like, you might finish this book and go, oh, that was good, and walk away. But I went back and I had given it 4 stars, and I've gone back months later and given it 5 stars because I cannot stop thinking about this book. This is about a woman named Allison and a woman named Lucy. Oh no, Alice and Lucy. So they are friends that met at college, and they were roommates, and then their lives have very much parted ways. Alice married someone, moved to Tangerine, or Tangier, I should say, not Tangerine, and Lucy went her own way. And then one day Lucy shows up at Alice's door, and you can tell, like, it is very clear that Alice is uncomfortable, and you don't know why. And you don't know why for so many reasons. That's what I love about this book, is Alice moved to Tangier and really didn't leave her house. Like, she's moved there and she barely leaves her home. And I think she's dealing with maybe depression or something along those lines. And it's very clear that Alice struggles with emotions and anxiety and all of that. Lucy shows up and you're like, oh, is it just like a flare-up? What's happening? And so you're trying to learn more about Alice and also about Lucy. And this is such an interesting little duo. The ending, what? The ending. Finally, I want to recommend Jane Steele. This was really all over BookTube a couple of years ago, and that's actually why I picked it up. It is a Jane Eyre retelling, and I loved this because it's basically looks at the life of Jane Eyre and goes, but what if Jane Eyre was actually a like sociopath and killed a lot of people? But what I really liked about Jane Steele is she kills a lot of people, but the people that she kills are kind of jerks, are kind of terrible people. And so you're kind of like, well, you know, that's okay actually that she's doing that. And you kind of have to check yourself throughout it. Is she a good guy or is she a bad guy? Who is Jane Steele? I love these kinds of books. Gray in a book. Give me a gray story where you don't know what is good and what is bad. Give me a gray ending where you don't know how it ends. It's not tied up in a bow. I like people and characters that are a mystery in and of themselves, because aren't we all? And I love stories that end with a mystery as well. But these are the mysterious gray characters and books that I just love to bits. So I wanted to share them with you. I think they are absolutely fantastic books to read for fall. So I hope that you will pick up one of these this fall, and I hope that you guys are doing really well. Let me know in the comments below if you like gray characters and gray endings, or do you need it like nicely wrapped up in a bow? Do you need to know how you feel about a character going into it? Or what do you think about these kinds of books? I would love to know, and I will talk with you next time. Okay, bye!